trauma-sensitive schools, compassionate schools, these labels may sound like jargon, but they're a real principle and a real program, and so we're going to talk about those as part of this committee. But I've been greatly privileged to work with educationnc.org and over the last year. And as I've traveled, or the last 6 months more specifically, as I've traveled, we've had a good fortune of hearing many, many stories by those that are impacted by trauma in a really severe way. And how when a teacher or a counselor takes the time to understand the root cause, they're all better for it. Last week I was with a child whose mother was undocumented, and he went home to bury her sister. And in 7 years, he hasn't seen his mother. Every morning at 3 a.m., he gets a text message from her saying, "Hey, I love you, keep going." He explained to me, as I told him my own story, which is I came from a fairly traumatic childhood experience myself, he explained to me that it took him a while, it took him several years to really come to grips with his mother missing. He felt like he'd been abandoned, he felt like he had been lost. But it was counselors and teachers who really understood that it wasn't that he was acting out because he was a bad student. It wasn't that he was struggling to make the grade because he wasn't smart. In fact, he had been one of the smartest kids, and he was still one of the smartest kids in his class, according to his teacher. It was simply that his mother had left him and couldn't come back because of our policies, and that traumatizing experience impacted him, right? We went to Eastern North Carolina, and we met a guidance counselor who had 2 twins in her school, and they both missed 90 days. And it was only later that she realized that they had each missed 90 days, they were in separate classes, because they were sharing a pair of shoes. And so that's the reality of North Carolina. It's a reality we too often ignore and too often forget. But the promise of trauma-sensitive schools, the promise of compassionate schools, is that we begin to sort of acknowledge Dr. Flood's comments, we begin to marry the community with the school. We begin to marry our approaches to the student, and we begin to understand that, as Dr. Flood said, that the teachers at home are as equally important. And if you're missing the teacher at home, if you go through trauma at home, if your parents are alcoholics or leave, or you endure violence in your family, that you can't fully learn. And so I'm going to turn it over to Katie now, because she will tell you some of the science behind this.
Thank you, Nation. I am really honored to be here with you all today. I tend to run in child welfare circles, so I'm excited to meet so many new people who are passionate about raising this next generation of kids, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why trauma and learning is such an important issue for us to be delving into. And I'm going to start, I want to get us all kind of on the same page to start with. So I'm going to go all the way back to what is trauma. And as Nation kind of alluded to a little bit, trauma isn't one event that happens. And every person is going to respond to the same event a little bit differently. So whether or not someone experiences trauma is really an individualized thing. But the types of events that can lead children to experience trauma include one-time situations that are extremely stressful and life-threatening, like natural disasters or really serious accidents, but also things that are really ongoing and just day after day after day are undermining their sense of security and safety and well-being. And that can be everything from poverty and food insecurity and homelessness and sharing a pair of shoes, to violence in their communities or their households with domestic violence or child abuse. It can also be a caregiver who's not available to help take care of this child and give them the security that they need. And that may be because the caregiver is struggling with substance abuse or mental illness, or it could be because the caregiver isn't present anymore. Maybe they're incarcerated, maybe they're serving overseas, maybe they're deceased, and that child has lost one of their core attachment figures. Okay? These are also called ACEs. You may hear them called that. That stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And over the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of research around the prevalence and the outcome of ACEs. And let me see if I can figure this out. Maybe not. Well, look at that. Unfortunately, they're pretty prevalent. So if you look at a general population, about 2/3 of the population will report having experienced a traumatic event in one of the categories that I just mentioned to you. more than 20%, more than 1 in 5 of the children in these classrooms will have experienced traumatic events in at least 3 of those categories that I just listed. So that's compound, complex, ongoing trauma that these kids are experiencing. And that's having drastic effects on their learning. It's got long-term outcomes in mental health, depression, suicidality, substance abuse, and in physical health, like cancer and diabetes and heart disease, all of these things. But let's go back to why it matters for education. Imagine you're driving down the road and a dog runs in front of you or someone slams on the brakes right in front of you. You're going to be flooded with stress hormones. You're going to have corticosteroids running through your body, and you're going to develop kind of a tunnel vision on what you need to do. Your heart's going to pound. You're going to slam on the brakes. You're not going to be thinking about the grocery list anymore or the things you need to do when you get to work. You're focused on the dangerous situation in front of you and taking care of it. And that is a great evolutionary thing that protects you from a lot. But when it happens all the time, and those stress hormones are always flooding your body, it has very negative effects. And in fact, those same hormones that are protecting you when that car puts on its brakes right in front of you are actually toxic to the prefrontal cortex, which is right here behind your forehead. And that's the part of your brain that helps you pay attention, that helps you make problem-solving good choices, and really to regulate your thoughts and your feelings, to be able to do the things you need to do for school, right? It's at the same time enhancing the functioning of other parts of your brain that function on emotion and instinct. Because think about it, if you're in danger, you don't need to take time to make a rational, careful, logical decision. You need to do something right now and make sure you're safe by instinct. That's the part of your brain that's going to be stronger. So these kids come to school in survival mode. They are scanning the environment for danger, they're always on the lookout, and they're ready to be in fight, flight, or freeze. And let's think about what that looks like. If I'm ready to fight because I'm in danger, I'm going to look aggressive, I'm going to look defiant, and I'm going to look like, someone that you may not want to mess with. If I'm ready to fight or to fly or to freeze, I'm going to be withdrawing. I may have my head down. I may look like I just don't care. I'm trying to shrink. I don't even want you to know I'm here. I'm trying to disappear into the background. Neither one of these things is going to be successful in school. You're going to have a harder time paying attention, following rules, and organizing your work in the classroom. And in fact, these kids get lower scores on their standardized tests, their IQ scores. They're 2.5 times more likely to be retained, and they're also much more likely to be suspended or expelled. Now, why does this matter? What can we do about it? That's the important question, right? We know this is a problem. If you take a typical lens, if you've got your glasses on for your typical school setting, your typical lens for how we look at these kids look impulsive, they look aggressive and defiant, they look like they're overreacting to everything. Maybe they've got ADHD, they're all over the place and they can't pay attention. Or maybe they're withdrawn and we think, that kid is not even motivated, they don't even care about this. And the reaction of the adults in the room is going to be, we need to get the power back. We need to show this kid who's in charge, what the rules are in the classroom, give this child consequences so they behave better. But you imagine that you're sitting there and you're that child on high alert and you're scared or you're angry or you don't think that the world is a safe place, and an adult comes at you, maybe angry, maybe a bigger adult than you, and is trying to take the power back. You're not going to get better, you're going to get worse. Now let's change our glasses, and let's imagine we're at a trauma-informed school. That same child looks very different to us because we see instead, maybe there's trauma being triggered. We don't need to know what the trauma was. We don't need to know what's going on to realize that there may be trauma being triggered in this child, and we need to pay careful attention to that. They may not be able to regulate their emotions. And so they need some skills. The reaction that we're going to have instead of we need to give them consequences is we need to teach this child how to manage themselves, how to cope with the environment, and give them the support they need so that they feel safe to let down their guard and take in the information that we're trying to give them. So what these schools need is first and foremost safety, so that I'm safe enough so I don't need to be on survival mode and I can start to fix some of these connections that my brain has had a hard time being able to make. I need consistency and structure so I know what's expected, I know what's going to happen next, that gives me safety. I need some coaching for those skills, and I need compassion so that you understand me. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that if we can do this consistently as kids are growing and give them these skills, we can reverse the effects that have happened in their brains from all the trauma they've experienced.
So one of the things that we'll do is we'll look at models around the country. The center for gravity for this movement is really in Massachusetts and Washington State. In Washington State, they like to say that it's principles, not a process. And so they look at, again, the culture and climate of the school and the community around it. They train and support staff so that they begin to have a conversation before they go into consequences. For example, one of the speakers at the Adverse Childhood Experiences Summit was explaining that they had a student who just completely had a meltdown. And the student had been performing well, and they had a conversation. What is wrong? Why? Right? They then, instead of doing the standard route, which they had adopted before, would have been expulsion, they put him in school suspension in a safe environment where he is able to sort of reflect and also continue to do work. In a lot of ways, they view it as critical to this really, really important work of breaking the school-to-prison pipeline. I think that you can see these up on this thing, but I mean, it comes back to communication. It comes back to understanding that discipline must be both compassionate and effective. You do still hold students accountable, but you don't have sort of unnecessary responses. And then go to the next. And again, you can see we have to understand diverse learners. We have to understand that the staff, the students, and the community all have ownership. And so these are the principles, and you can find these listed all over the web. But if you go to Adverse Childhood Experiences or Trauma-Sensitive Schools, they list these principles. In Massachusetts, they've adopted even policies, right? They've begun to lobby and advocate for changes sort of on a district-wide level and then now on a statewide level. But even here in North Carolina, Buncombe schools are actually 1 year into a process of adopting the Compassionate Schools model. So I'd encourage you to call on them as you sort of figure out how you can take these back to your home districts. Thank you.